At dawn, smoke billows over a Russian airbase, blackening the sky as alarms blare and videos flood global social media feeds. Ukraine has just pulled off its most daring attack yet. Dozens of drones deep inside Russian territory, destroying bombers that many thought untouchable. Headlines call it a turning point, but just hours later, something even more shocking happens. The world's most powerful nation, the United States, barely reacts. President Trump stays silent. No new sanctions, no fiery press statements, just cool, calculated quiet. What does this mean? As Ukraine and Russia bleed, has global leadership folded its arms? And could this spell the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous crisis? In the next few minutes, we'll dig deep into the facts behind the headlines. Why has Ukraine risked everything on drone warfare now? Why is the US, for decades the linchpin of European security, suddenly stepping back? And what are the hidden dangers no one is talking about? Could this silence be the fuse for something even worse? Pause for a second. Imagine being a policymaker in Kyiv or Berlin or Washington. The rules of the world seem to be shifting beneath your feet, right now, in real time. It's more than a war. It's the fabric of global order tearing, stitch by stitch. So, how did we get here? Let's rewind and break down the story behind today's headlines. Because to really understand the risk, you need to know the stakes. Just over 3 years ago, the world watched in shock as Russian tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border. A full-scale invasion, something Europe hadn't seen in generations. The declared goal, the so-called denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine. But the reality was nothing less than an assault on Ukraine's independence and by extension on the post-Cold War order itself. Since then, the facts have been grim. Russia now occupies roughly 19% of Ukrainian territory. The front lines, stretching hundreds of kilometers, snake through devastated cities and villages, from the battered streets of Mariupol to the embattled hills of the Donbas to the battered edges of Sumy and Pokrovsk, where recent Russian offensives have eked out only marginal gains. But the cost has been staggering. According to credible sources, Russia has suffered losses that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago, more than 790,000 killed or injured. Ukraine's own casualties are heartbreaking, estimated at around 400,000. These are not just numbers. Each digit is a shattered family, a future erased from both countries' destinies. And in the background, Ukraine's economy is buckling. Since the start of the invasion, its GDP has plunged by over 22%. Critical infrastructure, energy, transport, industry lies shattered. Every day, Ukraine is burning through resources, relying heavily on Western aid to hold the line. Russia, on the other hand, has shown a strange resilience. Despite sanctions, its GDP is up, 5.6% growth since 2022. Moscow has tweaked its economy, shifting trade eastward, finding new buyers for its oil and gas, and pouring money into defense. Still, this strength comes at a price: soaring military spending, a tech sector gutted by brain drain, and a society under ever tighter control. You might wonder, with so much blood and treasure lost, how could peace still be so far away? The truth is, every attempt at talks has ended in frustration. The most recent round of negotiations, held in Istanbul in June 2025, was no different. Orchestrated by Turkey and nudged by President Trump, who, sources say, wants a quick resolution, the meeting delivered little more than a prisoner exchange agreement. The core disputes, the status of Crimea, the future of the Donbas, Ukraine's sovereignty, are as unresolved as ever. A U.S. State Department official, after the talks, summarized the mood with cold realism. "We were disappointed but not surprised by Russia's list of demands. Moscow is stalling, and everyone knows it." Yet just as diplomatic doors keep slamming shut, the fighting is heating up. Ukraine's drone strike on June 1st is the clearest sign yet that Kyiv is willing to gamble, to innovate, maybe even to cross lines that could alter the shape of the war. In a meticulously planned operation, Ukrainian forces used smuggled drones, hidden for months inside Russian territory, to strike multiple airfields simultaneously. By Kyiv's count, more than a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet was at least damaged, possibly destroyed. But the real victory, many experts say, is psychological. Those who have been saying Putin is winning are wrong, argues Clifford D. May, president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. The Ukrainians are holding their own, even though the support they've been receiving from the United States and other free nations has been woefully insufficient. It's a stunning rebuke of Western caution. Still, this bravado comes at a moment when Ukraine can least afford to burn bridges. Meanwhile, public opinion is shifting. In Russia, 61% now say they support peace negotiations. In Ukraine, the number is 51%. People are exhausted. They want the killing to stop, yet the politicians and generals cling to maximalist positions. How is the U.S. responding? Here's where the plot thickens. For decades, America was Europe's security anchor, the arsenal of democracy. But in this conflict's latest chapter, Washington is retreating to the sidelines. President Trump, once famous for his unpredictability, has grown silent. After Ukraine's audacious drone attacks, there was no major statement, no flash of anger, zero new sanctions against Moscow. Even prior threats of devastating tariffs have gone nowhere. Secretary of State Marco Rubio acted only at Russia's request, holding a low-profile call with Sergei Lavrov, reiterating the U.S. desire for direct talks, but with little visible pressure. Trump wants a ceasefire. That's possible, but only if he makes good on his threats to put devastating pressure on Putin, says Clifford May. Yet instead, the administration seems almost resigned to stalemate. Inside Ukraine, that silence is deafening. President Zelensky issues warnings that any reward for Russian aggression could set a terrifying precedent, showing the world that war pays off. At the same time, European allies are feeling the chill. Wolfgang Ischinger, former German ambassador to Washington, puts it starkly. Europe going it alone in Ukraine could be the end of NATO as we know it. That's a hair-raising thought. If the U.S. check-writes peace but doesn't police it, can Europe step up? Or will Moscow sense an opening for even bolder moves? The risk is not just battlefield losses. There's a bigger danger that the rules that kept Europe safe for generations may be dissolving, faster than anyone expected. The economic toll is mounting. Ukraine's GDP, down 22.6%, threatens basic services and military readiness. Russia, while growing, faces a war economy's long-term corrosion. And with each passing month, Western aid trickles slower. The House and Senate in Washington squabble over fresh support, while some leaders threaten tariffs and others talk compromise. The political will that united the West in 2022 is fracturing. There's also the question of technology. Drones have become the wonder weapon of this conflict, cheap, smart, swarming. Their psychological effect is outsize. No base, no city, no general sleeps safe anymore. But with every new strike, the risk of escalation grows. Will Russia answer with its own innovations, or with something far worse? As international focus drifts, and with the U.S. in electoral flux, some analysts worry about a vacuum of power and predictability. Michael Clark, a prominent security expert, warns, peace talks will continue in a circle until the U.S. gets more heavily involved. But will Washington step up? Or has the world entered a dangerous new phase where uncertainty itself becomes the greatest weapon? In the last week alone, Russia has clawed back 33 square miles in Ukraine. Ukraine, in a show of nerve, gained just 2 square miles in Russia. The balance is shifting daily, but not decisively. What are the possible futures now? Some envision a grinding, frozen conflict with shifting lines, a new forever war sapping Ukraine's strength. Others whisper of a negotiated deal, with Kyiv forced to cede land in return for peace. The most chilling scenario, a wider conflict drawing in NATO, with consequences no one can predict. As we close this first half, here's the burning question. What if the silence from Washington isn't caution, but a signal? Could a disengaged America tempt Russia into new gambles, perhaps even beyond Ukraine? Is the world sleepwalking toward a point of no return? In the next part, we'll dissect the hidden risks, the technological arms race, and game out the futures that could define not just Ukraine, but the fate of the whole world. Stay with us. As Ukrainian and Russian forces continue their deadly exchanges and the world watches peace talks go nowhere, a simple but terrifying question pulses beneath the headlines. What happens when the world's strongest backer, the United States, decides to take a back seat? What does this vacuum mean for Ukraine's future and for the balance of power from Europe to Asia? Let's stare into the storm. The present is already grim. More than 790,000 Russian casualties. An exhausted Ukraine, battered economically and militarily, its GDP plummeting by nearly a quarter since the invasion began. Russia, too, is strained but still resilient, its economy paradoxically growing even amidst sanctions and the cost of war. In early June, Ukraine's audacious drone strikes deep into Russian territory shattered the illusion of Moscow's invulnerability, damaging bombers the Kremlin once relied on to project power. It was a morale-boosting blow for Ukrainians and a strategic headache for Putin. But there's a chilling reality beneath the success. Ukraine is running this high-risk playbook because time and Western resolve seem to be slipping away. Internationally, the diplomatic landscape is foggy, and in that fog, danger lurks. While Turkey and other powers try to mediate, the U.S. administration's posture has shifted from energetic engagement to muted encouragement. President Trump, visibly frustrated with the lack of progress, no longer threatens sanctions with the same vigor. Some American officials admit, off the record, that they're bracing for protracted stalemate, or worse, a larger conflagration. Those who have been saying Putin is winning are wrong, insists Clifford D. May, president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. The Ukrainians are holding their own, even though the support they've been receiving from the United States and other free nations has been woefully insufficient. But what does holding their own mean when your main ally's attention wanders? Here are the futures we face as the world teeters on the edge of a new power arrangement. First, the slow grind. The most probable, yet least desirable scenario is a long, exhausting war. Ukraine and Russia keep fighting, with minor gains and losses. Russia recently took 33 square miles. Ukraine, just 2. The front lines shift but never break. The slow erosion of Ukraine's economy and military, the steady drip of casualties, and the decay of international attention push Kyiv to a breaking point. Aid shrinks. Calls for compromise grow louder, especially as the U.S. refocuses on its own priorities. For Ukrainians, this means daily life under the shadow of war, infrastructure in ruins, and a future mortgaged to uncertainty. For Russia, it's a chance to continue its strategy of attrition, betting that the West will eventually tire of the cost and complexity. Second, the forced settlement. One scenario sees the U.S., desperate to close the chapter, brokering a face-saving deal that requires Ukraine to give up territory, perhaps Crimea, perhaps the Donbass. In exchange, Kyiv receives security guarantees and money for reconstruction. On paper, this ends the bloodshed. In reality, it's a bitter pill for Ukrainians and a risky precedent. If borders can be redrawn by force, what lessons will other autocrats learn? Ukraine's President Zelensky warns, any reward would only show Putin that war pays off and that decisions for Europe should not be made by Putin. This path risks lasting resentment, fueling more conflict down the line, and could destabilize Ukraine's fragile democracy. Let's not forget economic implications. The longer this war drags on, the more shockwaves ripple through global energy and food markets. Russia, boxed in by sanctions yet buoyed by alternative buyers, is betting the West's resolve, and its economies, will crack first. Senator Lindsey Graham is pushing for tariffs on Russian energy, but without U.S. leadership, will the world follow? And here's a rarely discussed but chilling possibility. The more Ukraine targets Russia's critical military assets, the more Moscow might feel pressured to escalate. Former Ukrainian Deputy Head of General Staff Ihor Romanenko says the drone attacks helped the West because it targeted Russia's nuclear potential. But he and other experts also worry about unintentional escalation. The fog of war, especially when strategic assets are hit, can quickly spiral into miscalculation. All these scenarios pivot on a single axis: American engagement. As Michael Clark, a leading security analyst, notes, peace talks will continue in a circle until the U.S. gets more heavily involved. So what does this all mean for you, the viewer? Why should you care about a war thousands of kilometers away, fought with drones and diplomats, played out in grainy footage on your phone? First, understand, the world order you grew up in is on the line. If Ukraine, a sovereign country, is carved up by aggression, it sends a message far beyond Eastern Europe. It signals to autocrats everywhere. If you're patient, if you're ruthless, you can get away with it. Today it's Ukraine. Tomorrow, it could be Taiwan, the Baltic states, or any country deemed weak or distracted. The U.S. stepping back creates not just a European problem, but a global security vacuum. Second, economic impacts don't check their passports at the border. Higher food prices, supply chain disruptions, these are direct outgrowths of the war's spillover. Ukraine, long known as Europe's breadbasket, and Russia, a giant in global energy, both wield enormous leverage. If the fighting continues or escalates, you'll feel it in your pocket. Third, democracy and international law are being tested. Do treaties and borders matter, or are they just ink on a page? How the world responds to Ukraine today will shape the rules of the international system for a generation. As Ivan Krastev, a leading political scientist, put it, where Trump is wrong is to see the war in Ukraine primarily as a land dispute of little significance beyond Europe. So, what can you do about it? Stay informed, first and foremost. Pressure your elected representatives to take a stand, whether that's on foreign aid, sanctions, or diplomatic engagement. Demand that your country upholds international commitments. Support humanitarian efforts that provide relief to civilians caught in the crossfire. And, most importantly, don't let war fatigue dull your sense of outrage at injustice. History is written not just by the powerful, but by those who choose to pay attention, to raise their voices, and to refuse complacency. Remember, disengagement is itself a decision, and it has consequences. The vacuum left by America and the West will be filled by Russia, by China, or by chaos. To the burning question from the start, does waning U.S. involvement mean a dangerous power vacuum? The answer is a sobering yes. The world order built after World War II was premised on the idea that powerful nations would not ignore naked aggression. If America turns away, others, both friends and foes, are watching. The risk of escalation rises, the fabric of alliances frays, and hard-won norms evaporate in the face of brutal force. Yet a crucial fact remains hidden in the shadows of the nightly news. While Ukraine's drone strike made headlines, it also uncovered a startling vulnerability in Russia's own security apparatus. According to several intelligence leaks, these strikes were aided not just by Ukrainian ingenuity, but by increasing dissent within Russia's own military ranks, officers quietly passing information to Ukraine, hoping to end a war they now see as unwinnable. This underreported fact hints at cracks within the Kremlin's armor and could become a decisive factor if the conflict drags on. So, as the world seems to drift from the past certainties of American-led order into a more perilous multipolar world, remember, Ukraine's struggle is not just its own. It's a battle over the ideas and rules that shape our lives. As the war's next chapter unfolds, on the battlefield, in secret rooms where deals are made, and in the hearts of ordinary people, what happens next depends, in no small part, on whether we choose to pay attention. Will we look away, or demand that our leaders meet this moment with courage and clarity? If you believe this story matters, share this video, subscribe, and join our community for further updates. And